the short answer is, yeah, we're seeing these declines. We're also seeing them in Michigan. Don't know why I said the short answer, because the long answer is also yes, but there's a lot to it. We mentioned, these programs, the CRP or the Conservation Reserve Program, fewer acres into that, enrolling in that are falling out. The prairie pothole region, like that's like the duck factory of North America, right? Like if they see a number of years of drought, like that's really impactful for some species. Specific to Michigan, we rely a lot on our like homegrown Great Lakes mallards. That's a lot of the ducks that we have in the state. And we've been seeing long-term declines in those as well. I would say, I'm trying to make sure I get this right. I think it was over 40% declines in Great Lake mallards between 20 and 2022. Like that's substantial. And it always brings up that conversation, right? Like mallards are declining. Well, why the heck are we still shooting 2 hen mallards? Like we should go to one hen mallard. But current research, and it aligns with previous research as well, has shown us that hen mallard harvest is actually a pretty small component of annual mortality. And that it's
interesting
that reducing bag limits, or even, under current numbers, like if we reduce the bag limit, it would not be likely to increase survival. And so you gotta get into like additive versus compensatory mortality, right? So like the idea that if we shot fewer hens,
more ducks would live.
You would think so,
Yeah,
but in reality, it's just more ducks. You're just feeding more foxes, coyotes, whatever. So, like, non-hunting mortality is really high, and decreasing the bag limit wouldn't deal with that, wouldn't, change that.
Interesting. I love that answer.
Yeah. So it's like, it's a real thing. I mean, we're trying to do what's best for the resource, and we talk about this, every year with our Citizen Waterfowl Advisory Committee. That's always a question that's been asked, like, mallards are declining. Should we go to one hen? Should we go to one hen? And the reason we haven't is because it won't solve the problem at hand. And it's not necessarily like the counter to that is, well, it's got to be making it worse, and it's really not. We have more predators than ever on the landscape because we have fewer trappers than we've ever had, so that's a big issue for nest success. But also just quality of nesting and brood rearing habitat, that's a big thing. I mean, for decline for waterfowl and most bird species that we've been talking about. But then what's interesting for Great Lakes mallards too is this hybridization with game farm mallards.
Yeah, I've done some studies on that.
Yeah,
like research and it's not good.
No, and it's pretty wild. So
they had they really hoped when they let all those mallards go that it was going to do good.
Yeah, and it still happens. Like, I think
other states,
Europe, like it's over 3 million a year. The Atlantic flyway, I don't know how many they release. I think in North America, like historically, we probably released around 500,000, and then I think around the 60s they started to dial it back a bit, but we still see probably 250,000 game farm or captive reared mallards released on the landscape. And why that's a problem,
I love this.
These mallards are not wild mallards,
right?
They're captive reared, so there are differences in them, but they can breed.
Privileged.
Yeah, so privileged. Soft cushy life, talk about the 4 seasons, goodness. But they can hybridize with our wild mallards, and they are.
Yeah.
So then, when you get that, that hybridization and that gene flow, you end up with these individuals that now are, they have shorter, fatter bills. Like we see these physiological differences. They actually have like 50% reduced feeding efficiency.
Yeah.
They eat more like a chicken than a duck.
Good luck migrating under those terms.
Yeah, and they also, like the hens, act more like domestic birds when they're nesting. So they don't really put in a whole bunch of effort to one nest. They kind of just dump them all over the place. Larger clutch sizes, extended breeding season. So it's really hurting production. So when we start getting those hybrids and they're not putting that energy into that nesting, like we're thinking that's also a big part, and research is suggesting that could also be a big part of this decline we're seeing in Great Lakes mallards. So
interesting. One of the things I read too was for migration too. So that they're interbreeding with a wild mallard and a farm raised mallard mate. Their babies then pick up characteristics from both. And some of those characteristics make them weaker. That would be like the Kyle, my dumbed down version.
Reduced fitness.
Yeah, reduced fitness. So, and because of that, their feeding efficiency is bad. Their nesting is dumb. And the way they do things just isn't as efficient. And a lot of them can't make the migration the same way as well. I guess there's something with that. Like they just don't have the physical fitness to do it. So,
or some of them just don't migrate.
Yeah,
they just hang out in these like urban areas where there's open water and stuff, and
that's too. And like in the mind at the time is like the groups that I understand that let them go on purpose was like hoping to like spur up the population for hunting opportunities.
Yeah.
It's like the intention was pure, but the result was anything but.
Yeah, and that's really what we're learning. And it's kind of thought that like for the Atlantic flyway, they've kind of passed the tipping point where they may never recover to a fully wild mallard population ever again, and that we still in the Mississippi flyway.
That's what I read.
Yeah, have a chance that if we could stop it all right now, it's just these things are always so much easier said than
it's
done,
like every disaster movie ever. If we just get in front of the virus.
Yeah.
I want to make a point on something that has nothing to do with any notes that we had talked about before, but I wanted to make this note. There's another issue that I am really upset about. Colton,
Get ready.
Colton, the kid that no. You'll agree so much we might hug. Colton, my buddy that I duck hunt with, excellent waterfowler. The kid's an amazing turkey hunter too. He is the future of hunting and conservation. He does a lot of work too at Shiawassee. You've probably met him a handful of times, but just a great kid. Anyhow, he told me that he called the Department of Natural Resources on it, and they came out and investigated it. And I'm telling all you duck hunters now, I'm coming for you, and I'm gonna tell every single I'm gonna tattle. I'm gonna go crazy because I can't tell you how many birds I found dead in Saginaw Bay, and let me tell you, it wasn't shot cripples that people couldn't recover, because I was finding piles of birds. I was finding all different species. I was finding mallards that were wasted. I was seeing, when I tell you, I went for a walk and I took a little video of it, and it's sickening. I'm walking, and it's hard to walk in these swamps, like Saginaw Bay. So it's like you got the big bay, and there's a lot of like grasses and stuff like that, and you kind of tuck your boat in there and then put out your decoys, blah, blah, blah. So I go walking around in the back areas, which is tough because it's swampy and this and that. I found in maybe a 400-yard walk, and maybe it's because currents were right there, maybe whatever, but it didn't look that way because I found piles and obvious like shotgun shells next to birds. I probably found 40 to 50 ducks inside of 500 yards.
When was this during season? Obviously?
This past season, yeah. It was during hunting season. And Colton, I said, hey, man, because I happened to see him out there by happenstance, same area, and I was like, dude, I went for a walk. He's like, it's always like this back here. He's like, I called the DNR on it. Something's got to be done about that. But if you see a hunter and they're not collecting their birds, or they're leaving them, or you're hunting with a person that isn't taking their game with them, or anything, A, don't hunt with them anymore, and B, correct the behavior, or call people that can. Because this has got to be stopped.
Yeah, and
by call out people that can, I don't mean the rock and a beat down. I mean the Department of Natural Resources, because it's just
report
right.
it. Call the report all poaching line, because it's tough. And I thought about bringing that up, but I didn't want it to be accusatory or anything, because I know it's not.
I'll do it.
It's not the majority of our waterfowl hunters.
No, it's
right?
not. It's not. That's why
I want to make sure that we know that. But when we were talking about captured euthanasia, and just it's some of our the immorality, those thoughts are coming to mind that
I could see why you could make that argument if I was speaking on behalf of the hunters.
Yeah, and I didn't want again, it's not accusatory, but it is a thing that happens. It's real, and I don't know where we lost sight of hunting and harvesting
for
and
food.
For food, and as a part of the culture and tradition in Michigan, and it became more about just shooting. I don't know. And
I promise you with every fiber of my being, because I know obviously we've had some contentious topics and stuff like this, but if you watch our show, if you watch our podcast, that is what I care about, is teaching people to hunt it for food, because it's clean, organic, beautiful meat given by God. And I do believe that selling hunting licenses to help the conservation of that, to keep that in the future. Yep. But I also look at it like this: in any group of people, 10% of them are a-holes. You know what I'm saying? Any group of people. You get
probably a pretty low estimation.
I have faith in humanity. So there are those a-holes, of course, in the hunting community. And I think that hunters, you need to sound the alarm on that. I mean, if you see it, attack it so they're terrified to ever do it again.
Verbally.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not inciting violence.
You're not condoning.
By attack it, I mean say, hey, man, that's not, shame them.
Yeah. Or at least take action. Don't do nothing. Because we rely so much on our hunter. We only have so many officers in the field, right?
Right.
And they can only be in so many places at once. They rely on other hunters. And it is really hard, because if you call, after something's happened, it can be very hard for them to, prove if they didn't see it. But you should still just always report it.